confirmed open.
Okay, Gorma Agat, Agus Tafalcha Rove a while. We do have a quorum and welcome you all to the meeting, and I now call the meeting to order. This is the 39th meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile devices must be turned off? Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs may be taken. And can I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly and be aware of the cameras and the sensitivity of the microphones throughout the course of the meeting. And then finally, I would remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Andy?
Trade union member, Chair.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything else? No? Okay, thank you, members. So, members, moving on then to item 1, apologies. Clerk, do we have apologies today?
No.
Okay. So, members, I was pleased then to move on to Chair's business. Do members have any apologies? Sorry? No. Okay. Okay, and move on then, members, to Chair's business. So, members, I was pleased to see our motion to extend committee stage of the sign language bill gain the support of the House on Tuesday. I take on board comments that were helpfully raised during the debate, and we will be mindful of the need to particularly hear from younger and older deaf people as the committee stage progresses. We were due today, members, to receive a departmental briefing on heritage, culture and creativity policies. The committee team was advised on Tuesday afternoon that the department would like to defer this briefing session for 2 weeks. The briefing had already been previously deferred to take place today, so that's a deferral on top of a deferral. So passing that on, any comment in relation to that? Shan? Go ahead, Shan.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering, obviously we only got word of this on Tuesday. Was there any reason given?
No, just the two further weeks would be gratefully accepted.
Okay, yeah, it's a bit. Given the urgency of these issues, I think it is a wee bit disappointing. Kelly?
We have quite a busy forward work programme coming up. Can we maybe ask the officials, remind them that this is the second deferral, and the next time, to be honest, given the fact that it's the committee's role, if one of the officers can't attend, that's one thing, but somebody must be available.
Yeah. Members content with that? Andy?
Sure. Just to reinforce Kelly's point, and perhaps we might CC the PermSec in, just to advise, obviously we are scheduling these briefings in, and there are others who are wanting to brief this committee, so when there ends up slots, and I know that there's been some moving around, we could be bringing others in who want to brief and engage the committee instead of being notified at short notice that somebody can't brief, and it may be a justifiable reason, but I don't think it's it gives us the ability to invite others in at such short notice.
Yeah, thank you. Brian, were you looking in?
No, just repeat the disappointment of others, and we're aware that our agenda will become more busy as time goes by, and it'll become more difficult to fit in briefings. We're trying to cover all aspects of the department's remit, so I'd align myself with the frustration of other members, and we trust it will be arranged in the near future, and that there won't be any further delays.
Okay, thank you, members. And members, I just want to flag up, also I'm sure other members are picking up growing and considerable concern among the sector around reported at this stage, but fairly heavily reported and flagged potential cuts to supports for people with disabilities and with additional challenges. I think it's important that we get a sense of what engagement the department are having with the DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions, in advance of this, and I think it would be very useful for us to get a sense of how many people here such changes would potentially impact, and the disproportionate level of that impact here versus what it might be in other places. So Shan, you have a hand up there.
Yeah, Chair, I want to really echo what you said. I've had a few meetings this week with people in the sector, and I think while we wait for the green paper from the Labour government, I would be really keen for our committee to even send a letter to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and just outline that, you know, Northern Ireland has a disproportionately higher amount of disabled people. Now, there's a number of factors for that, not least being our legacy. And I think that we realised that when we were looking at the transfer over to universal credit years ago, we realised that there would be more people impacted in Northern Ireland than across the rest of the UK. So if the committee were to be minded, and if yourself was minded, Chair, I would love to write a letter to the Secretary of State and just outline that Northern Ireland does have a disproportionately higher rate of disability. Not only that, we also have very unique circumstances, and that he should be minded about those circumstances when looking at any budgetary changes and changes to social security, whether that's through the Green Paper or through the budget announcement on the 26th of March. That we're waiting. This could have catastrophic impacts on our levels of poverty amongst those who are disabled if the rumours are found to be correct. So I would be really keen for this committee to get ahead of that and get a letter over.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, I would be completely in favour of people who have been often discriminated against accessing employment opportunities, not by anything inherent to themselves, but as a result of us not making the correct adjustments or arrangements for people. But putting the cart before the horse by just crudely cutting the support in a context where we have rising use of food banks, rising child poverty, cost of living crisis, I think that could all, like that, the context of all of that could be indeed catastrophic. Kelly?
I was going to say, I believe that I'd read something about St Patrick's Day, that there was going to be something coming forward potentially on St Patrick's Day, but whenever we get the detail of what is proposed or cut, obviously that could be a Green Paper, but I'm just thinking if we should reach out as a committee to our equivalents in Scotland and Wales as devolved nations, just so that we can garner their support, because we're probably all going to be singing off the same hymn sheet on this, because of the negative impacts it's going to have on some of the most vulnerable people across the UK. But I just was thinking if we could maybe say that we're concerned with it, and for those other committees, are they raising similar matters? Because it might well be that we could have a three-way letter to Westminster to say these are causing problems in the regions.
Okay, so there's a number of things. So that's right to the Minister to seek the to ask what engagement he is undertaking with DWP.
Officials, yep.
To
Second.
ask for the numbers, an assessment of the numbers potentially impacted.
Numbers and detail. The second letter was to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland,
Yeah.
to highlight the issues here and the disproportionate effect. And the third one is to reach out to our equivalent committees in the devolves in Scotland and Wales.
Once we have the detail, yeah.
Okay, is that agreed, yeah?
Yep, that's agreed. So members just asked you to note then the deferral, and we are writing and CCing the Permanent Secretary into the committee's disappointment that deferral. The stakeholder briefings, it has to be said, were all arranged to align with the social strategies and emerging policies, and they, though that throws that somewhat out of sync, so it is difficult. So just by way of an update then, I did meet informally on Tuesday with the Permanent Secretary, continuing those conversations to improve communication and information flow to the Department. I asked again for a copy of the legislative timetable, because that's going to factor heavily in our work, and we continued the conversation around the need for the committee to be given its place and for advance information and notification of important policy matters and announcements. And I did express that, you know, in relation to that deferral, it was disappointing. So I know that the Minister member has travelled to the US this week, and I would propose that we write to the Department to ask for a copy of the Minister's itinerary in the US and for information in relation to business being conducted that's related to the community's brief, just so we can get a handle on that, if members are content. Yep. And finally, members, then just to flag that I want to commend Sport NI Community Walks initiative there. It's taking place across a number of councils. That's a trial, I believe, and our own local area hosted one of the walks, or hosting a series of walks as part of this initiative. It was a very interesting exercise in getting people out and walking, but also talking to each other, and a very social and connectedness element to that. So I just want to commend Sport NI. I think that's a really good initiative, a way to balance a bit of a walk and a bit of social interaction. So moi shiv mar sin. So moving on, members, then to agenda item 3, which is the draft minutes, and those are contained at page 6 of your meeting pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of the 6th of March as drafted?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you, members. Matters arising then, item 4. They've been provided there with a summary table at matters arising at page 19. So as usual, I'll go through these items number by number and group and ask if you want to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific items. So can I ask then for members anything in relation to items 4.2 to 4.5? Kelly first, then Melissa.
Right, thank you. Just to say that the communications that's come through from the council, especially Derry Strabane, is very impressive of the work that they're doing. But I just wonder how much is the department taking heed or directing those councils when it comes to the anti-poverty strategy, which we're yet to see, because some of this work will certainly feed into local council activity on the ground, and how that will actually complement what the minister's actions are within the anti-poverty strategy. And then 4.4, page 34 of our pack, the fair payment rate for universal credit. It would be good to know what that equivalent is here, and what work's being done by our Department for Communities on that.
Yep. Okay, members content?
Just a
with that?
point to follow on from Kelly. Could we have a feedback from the councils on their outcomes of these plans? Because Causeway Coast and Glens is very aspirational as opposed to delivering facts. And could we do that if Kelly agrees?
Yeah, I'll agree to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
And again, too, just on the response there by the Chief Executive Derry City and Strabane Council, and the very fact that you have 6,000 applicants in the city and district that are in housing stress, and yet and all that the response by the Derry City and Strabane Council is actually hampered as well by the lack of funding. And that's quite clear. It's quite clear from the response there by the Chief Executive, and that I would once again just want to highlight just the need for that rates relief, in particular for the likes of the Derry City and Strabane Council. It doesn't have the same rate base as what they do have in places like Belfast and so on, and that it should be reconsidered in order to help the Derry City and Strabane Council area to address many of these very, very urgent problems that they're confronted with at the present time.
I think that's a very important point, but it's something we need to look at in all council areas. I think we can't take any in isolation, because every council area has these problems and they're not getting any less. So it's a good point.
Yep. Okay. Okay, members, moving on then. No other items within those sections? Members content with that? Moving on to summary table in your table pack there at page 3. Do members have any comments on items at 4.7 to 4.8? No, members content. Okay, thank you. Moving on then, members, to correspondence at item 5. So the memo is at page 43, and there's a table correspondence memo at page 14 of table papers. I'll go through as usual items by number and group and ask if you wish to draw out or highlight any specific or ask for briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. So do members have any comments on items 5.2 to 5.6? No, members content as per the... Go ahead, Kelly.
I've written down here 5.4, but I can't remember what I've written it down for. So can I come back to you on that one? I'm just trying to find my notes on that one, sorry.
Yeah, no worries at all. I'll just double check again with other members on 5.2 to 5.6. Might give you... Okay, members, I'll move on to the other section. We'll come back to Kelly then if she requires that. So 5.7 to 5.10, members, any items there? I just do want to draw attention to item 5.9, which is an invitation from NIFA to informally brief on how housing associations finance the construction and ongoing service of social housing. So I think I received this briefing as a result of the meeting that Kelly organised through the all-party group, and it was very informative, I have to say, and I certainly would say to members that anyone that didn't manage to make that session would probably benefit from it. So I'll just check with members, would members be content to receive an informal briefing? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
So, do you mean at committee or do you mean outside of committee?
It'd be outside of
Okay.
this formal committee meeting.
Okay.
It'd be an additional meeting arranged in some way. Yeah.
Do you think it'll be similar, sorry, Chair, to the meeting that we had with them?
I think it will now, and I think I wouldn't be 100% sure that there'd be sufficient difference. I think I've got the information. I think it's similar to that. So I would be keen to know if members who weren't able to attend that one would want an additional one, or maybe, I'm just not sure if. What do you think, Kelly?
To be honest, we do need to have a conversation with NIFA because we're currently using the 2023 rates to decide how much government is paying towards social homes. Prices go up, so we need to have a conversation with them about what they think about the fact that it hasn't gone up in those years. It's also what's happening with them because, to be honest, they're faced with the same planning difficulties and what's underneath the ground, the water difficulties as other developers. I'd love to hear from them what they think about developer contributions coming through because ultimately that's government will be paying for part of that. So there's a few matters there that might be slightly different. I know the last meeting that we had with them was more about how their finances worked, to understand what the reserves were, why they had reserves, how they calculate rents and things like that. So I think this one might be a move on from that.
Okay, well, in that context then, I think, there are important issues there. So, I think, are we agreed then, members, we'll seek an informal? Yeah. Okay, thank you, members.
No, mine's, to be honest, I was worried about the national insurance contributions that was coming up and that, but it's sort of covered in the letter, sorry. My mistake in marking something that shouldn't have been marked.
No worries, Kelly, not at all, thank you. That's a case of over-diligence, and that's always to be welcomed. So can I ask, do members, any, in terms of the tabled items, members, from 5.12 to 5.17, are there any items
Sorry,
there?
Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Sian.
Sorry, it was just on the 5.10 and the welfare. I can get it back up. Sorry, the
Welfare supplementary payment schemes.
Yeah.
Yes. So there was a couple of things, I suppose, that really just came up for me. Is really the first is it's really useful to get the updated costs. It would be useful to know, are any of these being considered by the minister? Not, in the next budgetary year, particularly given that we've seen our levels of poverty rise, and things clearly aren't working as they should. The other thing that I had just wondered about was the underestimation of the Universal Credit Contingency Fund. So when we looked at the 23-24 expenditure was 3.4 million, and then the actual funding requirement the year after was 6.2, which is an 82% increase. So I'm just wondering, is it that the original estimates for how much support would be needed for the transition were too low? Or are there other factors at play there? It is a huge jump, and I'm wondering, does this tell us something about that, about what's going on for people who are on that universal credit journey? If so many more people are having to access the contingency fund than the government or than the department had originally anticipated, it is a big jump, and I'm just wondering if it has risen that much. Is the budget for the incoming financial year going to suffice, or are we going to be left in a situation where that budget is used up partial way through the year and you have an awful lot of people who are stranded without any support? That's my worry. Is just that's a lifeline for people, and if we're seeing such an increase, where's the department planning for that to go?
Was there almost two parts to that? Are we seeking an analysis, the department's analysis as to why that has increased, and also what contingency plans are being made in relation to the budget?
That would be perfect, Chair. I think it would be good to understand where it's coming from, where that rise is coming from, in terms of what the department's seeing, and then also then what is the department doing for the year ahead? Because if that has jumped so much, do we have enough in the pot for need going forward?
Or just on that point, would that not have been because we had a significant number of people transitioning from working tax credits, etc., onto UC? So they're obviously forecasting that for that and during the 24-25 period.
I would imagine then there's and we are into that last real big tranche then of the move to UC. So do we have enough in the pot for the year ahead? Is really the concern.
Especially just to follow up on what Shan's saying, because we know that, isn't it ESA, Shan, that hasn't moved over yet, and they'll be coming. We know that they're timetabled to come. So, yeah, that would be a concern.
Are you content with the...
Yep.
Yep, and members content with that?
Yeah.
That we seek that information?
We're seeking it in writing, a response in writing.
Response in writing in the first instance, Shannon? Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
We can see what that illuminates. Okay, members, so otherwise content with the tabled items 5.12 to 5.17. I just want to flag up in item 5.16, there's a housing conference being held by Agenda NI on 26th of March, and our researcher, Eleanor Murphy, will attend and bring back a summary of the event, and members can make their own arrangements to attend if they wish in relation to that conference. Okay, members, so moving on then to agenda item 6, I'm just checking, do we have...
We haven't got Hansard or our representatives because we're running slightly ahead.
There's
The
anything-
SRs, yeah.
Yeah, could we take an SR? Could we walk our way through some of the SRs, members, just given that we are slightly ahead on timings?
Or the LCM report. We can go to 8, 9 and 10 and 11 maybe in the interim. Keep us going.
So 8, 9, we could probably do the LCM
Good, yeah.
report, yeah, so I'll maybe go to, yeah.
We need Hansard for it though.
Okay, so go to 8 then, which is item 8 SL1. So if members are content there, it's on page 115, and this is SL1, the Registered Rents Increase Order NI 2025. So members, this proposed rule would allow for an increase of 2.7% to rents of protected and statutory tenancies for those properties that meet the housing fitness standard. This would represent an average weekly increase of £2.26. Do members have any comments, or are they content for the department to proceed to make that rule? Kelly?
I'm not against the department making the rule, but can we get a list of who those protected and statutory tenancies are? It's just this comes up on because we have to review the rents on a regular basis through this committee, but we've never actually had a list of what these properties are. I know that they're quite limited, but it would be useful to have that.
Yeah, members content? Yeah, thank you, Kelly. And content to make the rule, but with that point, that request for information being sought. Okay, members, moving on to agenda item 9 then, SL1. This is the Emergency Fuel Payment Amendment Regulations, NI 2025, and they're contained at page 121 of your pack, members. So after the Emergency Fuel Payment Regulations 2025 are made, there was a discrepancy in the regulations identified. It is considered that it would be extremely unlikely that an eligible pensioner living in Europe would be paid both the winter fuel payment and the pension age fuel support payment. However, the regulations in their current form do technically allow for that possibility. To correct this minor technical error and to robustly protect public finances, the Department is taking the steps to eliminate the possibility of double payment altogether. An amending set of regulations, the Emergency Fuel Payment Amendment Regulations NI 2025, now needs to be made to correct this minor error. To ensure the smooth rollout of payments, which are to be made before the end of March, these regulations should be made as soon as possible. These regulations will therefore become operational from the 18th of March 2025. Unfortunately, this will mean breaching the 21-day rule in this instance. This is considered necessary to ensure there is no delay with issuing the pension age fuel support payment. So do members have any comments? And I am conscious that there has been an announcement. I think those payments are to start on the 21st of March. So any other comments, members? Kelly?
I appreciate the department's in a rush for this. My concern is that the people who are within Northern Ireland have to adhere to certain eligibility criteria, and they've picked up the fact that anybody who is living outside of Northern Ireland does have to have an address here. My concern is for those that live outside of Northern Ireland during the winter, they'll get an emergency, if they don't qualify for the other winter fuel payment, they'll get an emergency winter fuel amount, but they're not living here. Just having an address in Northern Ireland I don't think is enough, given the fact that other people living in Northern Ireland have to be living in a residential home during a qualifying period. So should there not be that they're resident in Northern Ireland during the eligibility period? You know, I just find that, you know, we may have people who are living abroad, fine, but should they be home in Northern Ireland affected by cold during an eligibility period in order to qualify? Because otherwise we're paying £100 to somebody that lives wherever, you know, in some nice warm place during that period.
So
Are we asking the department to provide further information, or because this is the formal agreement of the rule?
No.
and we will actually now need to, because of the time frames, consider the rule itself today.
This is part of this, you know, holding our feet to the fire with the dates on this, because the committee, if we hold it back just by asking our scrutiny questions, you know, we're taking money away from pensioners that didn't qualify for the winter fuel payment. But we can see here that in the rush to get the legislation through, there was something left out. Mm-hmm. We haven't had a chance to sort of ask that, and that's one of my questions is, you know, guys, what happens if the person that you're saying they have to have an address in Northern Ireland but don't actually live here? You know, especially during the eligibility period, whenever others have to comply with that. So, to be honest, it would be a case, I say at this stage, we let this go through, but the department has to explain how they're going to deal with that.
Yeah.
My understanding is that that rule is made for the payments to be delivered, and that this is to correct the error, to allow that for the European resident factor.
The correction of the error is wrong, because it doesn't clarify that the person who has an address in Northern Ireland but don't live here should have to meet an eligibility criteria of actually living in Northern Ireland during the winter.
Yeah, I understand the concern. I suppose the balance of that is the amount where that might be the case, and the delay, any further delay in getting the money to people who have already been waiting a considerable amount of time, the very many more people who will qualify. So I suppose that's the... So what, Clerk, could we do in terms of reflecting the concern, or highlighting the concern? Can we would you be content, Kelly, that we make the rule, but we very strongly reflect the concern that you've raised?
Because it feels to me like this is rushed legislation just to meet deadlines, and we're not getting to scrutinise, you know. So I have a concern that we're not actually, we're saying that people living in residential homes can get £50 if they're there during an eligibility criteria, but just because somebody has an address in Northern Ireland and they live elsewhere for the rest of the year or part of the year, that they don't have to meet that eligibility criteria. It's about fairness and balance, and I think if the department, I'm happy for this to go on ahead because our hands are tied, and I don't want to get the blame of folk not getting their £100, but this is rushed legislation.
Yeah, and your point is well made, and I do fully support the point about not getting information quickly enough to apply that type of scrutiny. It's a very good example of why that's so important, because that does seem like a very valid point, and it's now going to be, I suppose, not satisfactorily addressed. You know,
if they want to bring forward a further SL1, then they might need to, if they think that they need to address that. Now, it might be very small numbers of people, but this is public money.
Yep. Okay, that point's very well made, but so and the comment is taken absolutely for the value it is. But due to so given the time scales involved, we will actually now consider the rule and move on to the rule before.
We'll take the LCM next because Hansard's here.
Right, so
we'll
leave item 9 there. We'll be coming back to the rule at item 10.
Okay.
So we'll go then to the LCM members, which is contained at item 7, I believe.
Yeah.
So, agenda item 7 then, members, Employment Rights Bill, LCM, and this is to the agreement of the committee report. So you've been provided, members, with a copy of the draft report at page 93. This is the formal consideration before the report is ordered to be printed. I would remind you that we are focusing on the text of the report only, as the team will then address any formatting issues once the text is agreed. So can I ask for comments and then agreement on each section of the report? And I will start with powers and membership at page 95. Are members content with that section?
Agreed.
Thank you. Andy?
Content, just can I reiterate my declaration of interest as a trade union member, please? Just
Yes,
for the
thank you,
record.
Andy. Appreciate that, Andy. Yep, so members are content then with membership powers and membership at page 95. I next refer members to the background section of the report at pages 96 to 99. Are members content with that section?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. I refer members then to the evidence section of the report at pages 100 to 105. Are members content?
Agreed.
Thank you. I refer members to the committee consideration of the bill at pages 106 to 111.
Agreed.
Thank you, members.
I've received enough for that next one. I don't have to read it.
Okay. Okay, so are members content then that this concludes the committee's consideration of the draft report on the LCM? Yeah. Therefore, can I put the question that the Committee for Communities orders the report on the legislative consent memorandum on the Employment Rights Bill to be printed? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Yeah. And I would just like to thank members on all our behalf, the committee staff, for a very, in the circumstances, what I thought was a very robust report, and a lot of work has obviously had to go in very short notice to do that. So thank you, the team, for that. Okay, members. So we move back to Clerk, the agenda item 10. Thank members for their indulgence in moving around like this, but it is facilitating the passage of the meeting. So thank you. So we're going now to agenda item 10. It's at page 131 for members, and this is SR 2025/45, the Emergency Fuel Payment Amendment, Regulations NI 2025. So, members, you have been provided with a memo from the clerk at page 127 and a copy of the rule at page 131. Have members any objection to the rule? No, thank you. Members, then, can I put formally that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/45, the Emergency Fuel Payment Amendment, Regulations NI 2025, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, members.
We have our delegates here.
Okay, have we just one more SL?
I think there are, there's just
Just one more,
yeah.
agenda item 11. Well, I think we'll
Yeah.
do that, and then that'll be those finished. So, members, agenda item 11, SR 2025/38, at page 142. This is the Pensions Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Schemes Levy Ceiling Order NI 2025. Members have been provided with a memo from the clerk at page 139 and a copy of the rule at page 142. The committee considered the SL1 for this rule at our meeting on the 6th of February, when we were content for the department to proceed to make the rule. Do the members have any objections to the rule?
No.
Therefore, can I formally put the question that the Committee for Communities has considered SR 2025/38, the Pension Protection Fund and Occupational Pension Levy Scheme Levy Ceiling Order NI 2025, and has no objection to the rule, subject to the report from the Examiner of Statutory Rules. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, members, thank you. So we will now then, members, go to our briefing session, which is at agenda item 6. Thank you, members. Okay, members, thank you. So we're moving now to agenda item 6, and this is a briefing by the Women's Policy Group NI on the Gender Equality Strategy. So a copy of the briefing paper, member, is included at page 173, and I would now like to welcome the following representatives to the committee meeting. So we have Elaine Crory, who's Women's Resource and Development Agency, Alex Brennan, NI Women's Budget Group, Claire Moore, Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and Alexa Moore from the Rainbow Project. So, Elaine, I think it's yourself, is it, that's going to make a brief opening statement, then we'll move to questions from members.
That's right. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for having us here. We wanted to speak about this because we've had some issues getting it on the agenda really anywhere else, and we're grateful for the opportunity to talk about it today. A little bit of background. The Women's Policy Group is a group of policy experts, and we work on behalf of collectively for women and girls promoting gender equality through an intersectional feminist lens. There are a wide variety of organisations in the Women's Policy Group, from women's organisations and feminist campaigning organisations to LGBTQ organisations, migrant groups, service providers, NGOs, human rights organisations, trade unions, etc. There's really quite a wide variety, and when I put out a call saying, we've got a slot on the Communities Committee, there were more people who wanted to come with me than we could fit in the room. Many of us worked on the gender equality strategy, and other members of the group were part of the expert panel report. So we were represented, like I said, in the co-design groups, on the expert panel groups, and on some of the other social inclusion strategy groups as well. And all of these, the sort of timeline was very similar. So like all of the other social inclusion strategies, the gender equality strategy was intended to be part of a suite of strategies. They would work in concert with each other to address deep-seated and intractable inequalities. So as such, now we're deeply concerned that the Department for Communities appears to intend to progress in this term 2 of the strategies, albeit not exactly in the form that the co-design groups sort of worked on them. And the other 2 appear to be nowhere in the sort of forward work plan that we can see. And those are the gender equality strategy and the LGBTQIA+ strategy. The timeline for the development, like I mentioned, was very similar. The expert panels reported by December 2020, and the co-design groups began work in the spring of 2021. And we met regularly until October of 2022. October 22 was also the time when the caretaker ministers who were in place stepped down. At that stage, we met with officials from all of the different government departments to outline our issues and come to a final position paper. That's as far as we got. The Gender Equality Strategy Co-Design Group was under the impression that the work to develop the finalised strategy would resume again once the Assembly was back operational. And a finalised strategy would be ready for sign-off pretty promptly following the restoration of the executive, because in our view it was effectively done. We had a final position paper, and when we reached out to the Communities Minister in early 2024, really as soon as the ministers came back into post, he declined a meeting with us, and then shortly thereafter he wrote to the co-design group, and I believe all the other co-design groups as well, to tell us that the process was now being carried forward by the departmental staff and that our time was no longer required. And that's the last communication we had with the Department for Communities on this issue. I've provided in the briefing a list of the things that were in our final position paper and that we presented to the officials. I'm not going to read it all out. I'm just going to move to the sort of key concerns that we have as things stand at the moment. So firstly, the approach this seems to be the one that the Department for Communities is going to take, whereby 2 of the strategies are developed in this term and the other 2 may or may not be at some point in the future, means that the overlaps between all of those strategies will be lost. For example, and this is perhaps the most obvious one, the expert panel were very, very clear that the gendered aspect of poverty must be captured in the gender equality strategy, and that would work alongside the recommendations coming from the anti-poverty strategy to address poverty where it's most prevalent and leads to the most, I suppose, the most deep-seated generational inequalities. When we talk about child poverty, it's as a result of their mothers, usually their parents, being in poverty. Another thing we wanted to stress is that there is damage from this in terms of the relationship between the Department for Communities and the organisations in the sector who contributed to this work. Alex was saying that she did a calculation of all of the hours that we spent in meetings on this, and it was over 70, and that's aside from all of this sort of side meetings and the background work and the preparation that we did. Aside from that, all of this obviously not paid, a very significant amount of hours over 2 years. To have that work rejected without even like a courtesy meeting means that if there's a point in the future where they decide we need to pick this work up again, and now the statistics are at this point already more than 4 years out of date, and we have to begin from scratch, it'll be difficult to get those organisations back on board again. And I think in the case of the LGBTQIA strategy, which I'm not here necessarily to speak about, but it's relevant, many of those organisations don't have paid staff. People were giving up their free time. Also, we wanted to stress that the reluctance of the Minister to meet with the Gender Equality Strategy Co-Design Group is an issue. We also separately asked to meet with the Minister in our guys' Women's Policy Group, and we've met with all of the vast majority of the other ministers, and they've been willing to meet with us and hear from us and hear about the issues we're concerned with. And we haven't been able to meet the Communities Minister to speak about this or anything else. And I believe that the same is the case. Actually, no, the same is the case with the organisations involved in the LGBTQIA+ strategy. And then also, as we've mentioned before, the overlap between those issues that cross two different strategies, and that maybe have a particular aspect that relates to gender equality. Those are only going to succeed if they take on the gender dimension, for example, in case of poverty. And we, there's a particular focus on delivering women's economic empowerment and women's economic equality in the gender equality strategy, as you would imagine. And that action and actions related to childcare, for example, will have a direct impact on sort of anti-poverty work. It will mean that the anti-poverty strategy won't achieve everything it could achieve if it doesn't have these things backing it up. And then I suppose also just to add that there is no timeline for, so when the Minister wrote to us and asked us, really thanked us, I suppose, for our time and said that's the end of the process. On your end, there was no timeline for publication or implementation of any strategies laid out, both our ones or our two ones or any of the other ones that it does appear that will be happening in this term. And also the Minister has failed to set out any policies or initiatives that will either replicate or compensate for the lack of delivery on the social inclusion strategies. I won't be doing the strategy, but I will be doing these other things that will amount to the same. There's nothing like that at all. So that's an overview, and happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good overview. One of my questions was going to be around that interaction, but you've actually set that out already quite effectively, and it is a crucial point of importance around the need for all these things to interact and make sense and join up to achieve that delivery. And given the concerns you've raised in relation to timelines and that, do you have confidence at this point that this Minister will deliver these strategies?
These particular ones, no. I mean, there's an allusion to social inclusion strategies without naming them in the programme for government. But in work that we have seen elsewhere, and in the reluctance of the Minister to set any kind of timeline on it, I don't believe that there's a plan to deliver the gender equality strategy. If there is, I would be only too happy to hear it. But whenever I've heard the Minister speak about it, or whenever he's responded to questions, written or oral questions about it, he does seem to be focusing very specifically on anti-poverty and disability. And those obviously are extremely important, but really all four should be coming together.
Yeah.
Just to say as well that it's also to note that happened with the previous 2016 strategy, where there was a co-design group or a group that was created to help feed into that strategy. There was issues that were listed, and then that petered out, and then we started the process from square one again in 2020. And it seems like that process is going through the same thing. And like Elaine said, a lot of those stats are now over 4 years old. So, while there will maybe need to be some sort of revision in terms of those stats, the issues from 2016 were the same in 2020, which are the same now. And to start that work over in 2 years' time or something would just be a waste of money, to be honest.
And to that point, the sexual orientation strategy, now the kind of LGBTQI+ strategy, has essentially been in the works since around 2008. So many of these actions, so many of these strategies are so long overdue, and we can't afford to be starting them again in another 2 years' time if a different minister comes in and decides that now we're going to pick up the work again.
And leading on from that part of the discussion, so committee has expressed concerns around a range of these strategies and the break-off in engagement with these expert groups, that's why they're involved in the co-design, is because they have the expertise and the knowledge to advise and inform. Do you think that's a mistake, and do you think that will impact the quality of any strategies that come forward and the timing of them, as you've set out there. But do you think that's a mistake, that in that lack of engagement?
Absolutely. I think, even in terms of keeping goodwill there, so that if there is a point in a year or 2 years or 3 years where they want to revise this and want to come back to those groups, even keeping a courteous relationship by having had a meeting would have been, I think, a good idea. And also, there's a lot of people are very aware that they put in, 100 plus work hours into something that was pulled away from them, and that there's a real risk that might happen again. So I do think it's a huge mistake. Like a mistake in terms of tactics. It's also a waste of money. Money was put into these, not in terms of, we weren't paid as co-design groups, but Ernst & Young came in at one point to do some consulting work. There were experts who came to kind of bring us through the last stage. There's departmental staff hours, and those are all also, for nothing. And I think that there's, it's a mistake not just from the point of view of that relationship. It's also a mistake in terms of, public confidence in the department.
And if I may, Chair, briefly just add to that and say, I think you can probably hear the degree of concern and frustration voiced, but I think it's also important to say that despite that, the Women's Policy Group and the individual groups which come to the table are very, very positive about this work. And we're still very keen to engage. We're still very keen to make a difference and make that change. So our doors are open, and they remain open, and they have been open. So I think it's important to put that on the record as well.
But at this point, there is no engagement at any level, official or department, or any. There's no engagement.
No.
Okay, that's concerning, I have to say, and I think a mistake as well. I think there is huge value in those engagements. I often have said this to departments: co-design and co-production is where the real value is, and people are willing to give you the benefit of their expertise for free. You've mentioned Ernst & Young. I'm sure they didn't do it for free, but you have people who are experts by experience who are willing to give their time, and that's something I certainly value. I think this committee values. We'll pick up on it again after the session, but thanks for that. I'm going to go to members in the first instance then. So I'm going to Kelly, Melissa and Sian and Brian then. So Kelly.
Thank you very much. I'm shocked, but I have to say I'm not surprised. We've heard it from the disability sector, the way that they feel as if they've been treated as well. What would be very useful for me, if not the rest of the committee, you've mentioned 70 and 100 hours. If we could get a calculation of how many people have been involved from your side of the house, outside of the minister's officials, on this, because we can use even something like the living wage to calculate how much time that the sector has put into investing in helping government to bring forward an effective strategy for the people of Northern Ireland that they have thrown away. So that would be really useful. The other thing is, you talked about the damage, that co-production and co-design piece. I'm just wondering, within the Department for Communities, they have the Concordat agreement with the community and voluntary sector, and I believe that that's being updated. I appreciate the damage has been done, but it would be very useful. Are you feeding into the update to the Concordat to explain the damage that is done when co-production and co-design, one partner takes away that opportunity?
So my understanding of how the Concordat, the revised one, was come up with was through the this forum that NICVA organised, and that's not something that any of us can just go to. It's a sort of invite-only application kind of situation. There are people from our sector on that forum who do that, have been involved in that work, heavily involved in that work, but our involvement was entirely to do with responding to their consultation. It was about a year ago, and the Department for Communities staff members did come out and meet with the Women's Policy Group about that, because we did have some concerns about some of the not the rephrased Concordat, but some of the other aspects of that consultation. So that's the kind of extent of our involvement in that. But several of our organisations, well, not ours necessarily at this table, but several other community and voluntary organisations are part of that group and worked on that Concordat. I think one of the issues, the wider issue with the Concordat is, I I suppose it's a principle. It's a aspirational kind of way that we should be engaging, rather than actually what we've noticed on a day-to-day basis. Quite honestly.
I know at the time the Concordat, when it was being set up, I was actually kicking around the community and voluntary sector at the time, and it was seen as, at long last, an effective partnership tool. I'm just checking, NICFA hosts that forum, but it's the Department for Communities forum. Yeah. Do you feel that there's gatekeepers?
I wouldn't say that necessarily, but they are. It is an application process to get onto it. There's a certain number of spaces, and it's certainly not nearly as widely representative as the kind of meetings that we would convene among ourselves to come together on issues.
Just the last couple of questions. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. Could we get dates of when you have requested meetings from the Minister? That would be really helpful, because I want to find out why he didn't offer, if he wasn't available. I appreciate the Minister's very busy, even officials to meet with yourselves. And finally then, to me, this is an absolute waste of opportunity and a waste of public money to not take forward the strategies. Have you approached the Audit Office to ask for a review of these processes through the Department for Communities, to check to see how much public money is being wasted by restarting processes over and over again? Never mind the fact that it's breaking your heart. It breaks my heart to think that there are civil servants out there who are just passing paper around a table instead of actually getting on with strategies that can improve all of our lives. Because I know a lot of people think that the gender equality strategy is all about women. Mm-hmm. It's about improving lives across Northern Ireland. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we haven't had an appropriate use of Section 75 for years makes me furious, to be honest. It's absolute waste of civil servants' time telling us that they're not discriminating against people when they are. Yeah. But you can tell I'm quite frustrated. Mm-hmm. I could do time, because I know the amount of work that was put in the last mandate, and all of that time for the community and voluntary sector to be told you're not needed anymore, we'll do it ourselves. That's misogyny. Mm. But no, thank you for that. Sorry, Chair, I'm quite cross about this. Yeah.
Kelly. Melissa, Lanray.
Hi, Joe. You're all very welcome here today, and it's interesting just to listen to your discourse as well too. And only on Sunday there, I participated in a demonstration, a march in Strabane in relation to ending violence against women and girls. And central to all of that in many respects, was this whole idea of gender equality. And I wonder to what extent it is that when it comes to this, what appears to me like a complete breakdown in communication and relationship, and that in particular with the Minister, how much that's actually influenced by his lack of commitment to gender equality, especially whenever it comes to the likes of the LGBTQ strategies and so on. And to what extent is it influenced, we'll say, by that?
I will say, certainly I agree absolutely that violence against women and girls is driven by gender equality. And quite a few of us here on this panel and in this group were also on the co-design group for the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. A 100% different experience from start to finish in terms of how we were listened to and how we were valued, and how what we said in that room made a difference. One of the things we stressed from day one was, unless you're working at underlying gender inequality, you will just be you'll be rescuing individual people, but you won't actually be dealing with the overall problem of violence against women and girls. That was taken on board. That's been worked into that strategy. I think one of the things about that strategy that was very clear was we don't want to be replicating work from elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So some of the stuff we do want to be shoring up, if you will, is this kind of work here. But of course, this kind of work now seems to have come to an end. It's very difficult for me to speculate on what the Minister is thinking with regards to why some of these are being advanced and some of them aren't, and I wouldn't want to do that. But I will say that it's the kind of thing, and like Alexa mentioned, how often the LGBTQ strategy has been on the verge of something happening and then it hasn't, and how there's never actually been one going back, the better part of 20 years. That does make people start to think there's they just don't care about us, or there's just a sort of a feeling that we don't matter in the big scheme of things. And there is, there's to some extent, I think, some of the stuff that is happening with the anti-poverty strategy is pushed by the legal requirement to have an anti-poverty strategy. Mind you, that's been there for a while now, but it's pushed by that. But there are some parts of what we recommended in this strategy, the gender equality one, that are also backed up by legal requirements. Like the education around stereotypes is backed up by the CEDAW requirements that are now incorporated into law. There's things around pay gap monitoring that we should have had for the better part of a decade now, and we don't. That, you know, it does appear that's going to happen in the future, but, you know, the very slow process on acting on legal requirements and on statutory requirements it's obviously very frustrating, but that also seems to have been lost a little bit in some of this, that there's things that have to be done that aren't getting done. So certainly the nice to haves are very, very bottom of the pile.
And also I might just say as well that these suite of social inclusion strategies were part of the NDNA document from 2020, so we're now 5 years on from that, and while I know that that's not a legal requirement, you know, in terms of maintaining public belief or public engagement with government processes and the belief that from what is committed when there is cross-party working that actually will follow through, it's not really, you know, it's not great for that sort of confidence in government processes.
Yeah. And just finally, would you be concerned that we say just in addressing the anti-poverty, whilst that's vital and important in every respect, but that might be seen to be the softer or easier option rather than embracing the full content of many of the sort of recommendations by the strategy group itself? Would that concern you? That might be maybe the approach that's been taken at the present time by...
I think we've been very clear that the intention in New Decade, New Approach, and since then, was to implement all of these strategies together. These are social inclusion strategies. If you have me socially included, but Elaine not, it doesn't really make sense. I know that's a little bit flippant, but you know, it's a good illustration, and really they work together. And I think the value of the gender equality strategy in particular, you know, we're not talking about a minority group, and it's, you're right, Kelly, it's not just about women, it's about the good of our society, but women and girls make up over half of our population. In respect of the people that I represent, working people in Northern Ireland, women are now over half of trade union membership. So this is an integral part of the anti-poverty strategy, and indeed the disability strategy, as is the LGBTQI strategy. So I think dividing them is a very difficult thing, and it's counterproductive.
And when you look at a lot of the different kind of policies that have made people poorer over the past, 5-10 years, particularly reforms to welfare, universal credit, things like that, they disproportionately impact women. And when you look at things like, something that was in the LGBTQI strategy and also in New Decade, New Approach, which is the commitment to funding 3 rounds of IVF for individuals who are in need of that. That overwhelmingly affects women who need that IVF. It also has a really big impact, particularly on lesbian and bisexual women and trans people of all genders who might need access to that fertility treatment. So, there's really, I think particularly the gender equality strategy, almost like no other, is so deeply integrated into all of the other strategies that it is a real shame that it's not being brought forward.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sian, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. Trying to keep my frustration in check. First of all, can I just say a real genuine thank you, first of all, to the 4 representatives on the panel, but also to all of the groups that were involved in that co-design group and on the expert panel report. I think, as Kelly has outlined, I think it would be really useful to get a tangible number to put aside to actually, I suppose, to illuminate just the economic impact of the involvement of those groups and those individuals on those panels and reports. And the second point that I suppose came very strongly to mind was the public confidence, that the damage that this has done to public confidence in the department and in the work of the entire department. I was challenged when I brought forward your concerns to the Minister about those council meetings, in light of the Minister choosing instead to prioritise meetings with representatives of the Loyalist Communities Committee, because I heard from organisations within your network who told me he will meet with them and won't meet with us. And I think that public confidence and the erosion of that is really hard to quantify, but I think that you have very eloquently put across your point there. I have a couple of points, a couple of questions, I suppose, really, and some have been touched upon. The first is around EVOG, and given that gender-based violence and I suppose domestic violence were central to part of the gender equality strategy, do you believe we now have gaps in protection support for victims? And how does that sit within our ending violence against women and girls without a gender equality strategy? And the second then, I suppose, is, do you have any examples of how the failure to implement this strategy will have tangible negative effects on women, and particularly those in lower income brackets, because of the interconnected element of the strategy? And are there any other strategies or, I suppose, legislation or policy areas that you think will be negatively impacted without a gender equality strategy in place?
Thank you. I'll start by saying that I think everything rests on the gender equality strategy, in terms of when we do work on ending violence against women and girls, we're looking to develop on top of progress that's happening elsewhere. And an awful lot of the recommendations, I mean, you can sort of see them all there, they rely on both gathering the necessary data, but also things like work to develop women's health equalities and work on women's economic equality as a most fundamental kind of thing. Those kind of things need to be happening alongside work to address the causes of violence against women and girls, because you can address the causes, but if to help the people experiencing it in the here and now, prevention isn't good enough. They're already experiencing it. What they need is help to get out of that situation, whatever that situation might be it an abusive work situation, an abusive situation within the home, etc. They need the key, if you will, to get out of that situation, and that is going to be delivered 9 times out of 10 in the form of cash, in the form of money, which is to say her job is going to pay her enough to survive on her own, or welfare benefits are going to be enough for her to survive on her own. And if she isn't getting access to those things, and isn't likely to get access to those things, all the prevention in the world might help future generations, but it's not going to give that freedom to leave, which is so fundamental in abusive situations. So these things rely on each other, like I was saying, they kind of shore each other up. And there was, an article of Faith that was that while ending violence against women and girls will laser focus on violence and prevention of violence, all this other stuff is happening alongside it across society to lift women's situation and address inequality, so that the violence can be reacted to in the way that it demands, which is, I suppose, an urgent action to get out of there. But as a, I mean, again, speaking of overlaps, we've done some research that's shown that women with disabilities are disproportionately likely to suffer from violence against women and girls within the home, often from the person who is ostensibly their carer. If they are not getting enough via their disability benefits, or if they are reliant in some way on another person who has that power over them, until that inequality is addressed, they're going to be trapped. And all the prevention in the world isn't going to help them in the here and now. I could go on and on with examples of how these things overlap. I think you get the general idea. I've probably strayed a little bit away from the question, except to say that I wouldn't say that those other strategies won't work in terms of prevention, but I will say that there's gaps, because it did assume progress on every front pulling together. And that last pillar of the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy is working better together. And that was designed to find where all of those different strategies across all of society dovetail with each other, making sure there's no repetition of work, no waste of public resource, but that they're working together to pull everybody in one direction at the same time. And if things are missing, it simply isn't going to work as intended.
Also, I do think that the gender equality strategy, because you could look at some of the the recommendations that Elaine put in the brief, and we talk about childcare. There's been some sort of movement on a childcare strategy. The Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy has been published, so you could say, well, some of these things there's some movement on them, but I think the key part of the gender equality strategy that goes for each of the other social inclusion strategies as well is that they're almost like the overarching policy or strategy that links all of these issues like childcare, labour market participation for women, violence against women and girls, health outcomes for women, together to say these are all issues of gender equality, or rather inequality at the minute, and these need to be interconnected, and realised that you can't just have a childcare strategy without, or you can have a strategy around skills attainment for women without looking at childcare or unpaid care or violence against women and girls or health outcomes, stuff like that. So I think, and it's the same for the LGBTQI plus strategy, same for anti-poverty. All of these. The policies within them can't work in isolation, and I think that kind of speaks to Elaine's point that alongside these individual social inclusion strategies working as overarching policies, the social inclusion strategies themselves can't work in isolation, because no one is just a woman, or no one's just someone who has a disability, or no one's just LGBTQI plus or in poverty, whatever. We all have multitudes of identities, so that needs to be recognised.
If I could come in here, Chair, I think that it's really important that we're having this conversation in the wake of the publication of the final programme for government, because one of the key things that kind of jumped out at least me, and I'm sure that the rest of the members here, was that LGBT people weren't really mentioned across the programme for government. That's fine. I understand that it's a programme for all of Northern Ireland, but whenever you don't have these social inclusion strategies kind of backing that work up, backing the work that is being done to improve services and access to facilities, etc., for everyone in Northern Ireland, you miss where there are gendered impacts of things like domestic abuse or things like poverty and so on and so forth. One of the key things that actually jumped out at me, and it was because there was a recommendation in the LGBTQI plus strategy, at least the expert panel report, to really put a key emphasis on improving data collection for kind of monitoring how many LGBT people, for instance, are economically inactive, or how many are homeless, or how many, etc., etc. And one of the missions from the programme for government is that Better Homes mission, and a key indicator of that is homelessness, for which sexual orientation data is not collected. Now, we know from different research across the UK and further afield that LGBTQI plus people, and particularly young people within the community, are statistically more likely to become homeless, whether that is because of economic disadvantage, whether it's because of family kind of rejection and things like that. If you don't collect the data, you can't make policies to directly actually kind of fix that issue. So that's kind of one of the key ways where all of these things really tie in so closely together. And I think we really are losing out of some of the key benefits of that programme for government, because they're not being backed up by the gender equality strategy, by the LGBTQI plus strategy, and by other strategies that were promised.
And Chair, very quickly, just say that, the other area is around the Irish Congress of Trade Unions were up before the Economy Committee last week talking about the employment bill. So there's, for example, another area, the gender equality strategy would set that, as Alex has said, would set that kind of policy direction, which would inform the issues around employment for men and for women in Northern Ireland, and could better direct those pieces of legislation. Gender pay gap reporting regulations is another area which has stalled quite significantly. Some progress at the minute, but limited as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sian. And moving on then to Brian. Go ahead, Brian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your attendance and for your paper. You've clearly set out your frustration with the process. Thank you for your past involvement on the expert panel and the co-design group. Those who were involved there. You have used quite stark terms in places. You talked about two of the strategies being abandoned or appear to be abandoned, and work having been rejected. Now, clearly, that's in your paper. That's not the position from the department. They're saying that the work's been carried on by officials. I appreciate that's how you feel, but they're saying that the work is ongoing. Can you tell us a bit more about what their reply was? Was there any mention of timescale? I mean, we're aware, and you'll be aware of all the competing demands on everyone's time.
Yeah.
That's not to justify things being left in the slow lane, but in the realities of life, we do hear most comments and members speaking up about anti-poverty strategy and disability strategy, so that they are receiving more attention. They will be moving forward quicker. It's clear to me. So in terms of the formal reply from the department that the work is now being carried forward by departmental staff, and then you also add that our time is no longer required, being the co-design group.
Yeah.
So can you clarify has the co-design group, has it been formally told
Yes.
that it's how would you word that? What is the position?
The way I'd phrase it is we've been told that thank you for your time, you are no longer, this co-design group no longer exists.
Right, yeah, it's terminated effectively.
Yeah.
Right.
So there was no mention of a timeline in that letter. Everybody received the same letter. My understanding is across all 4 co-design groups. The letter was quite brief, and it did not outline any kind of a timeline at all. It just said the work will now be carried forward by officials. The reason it's become very, very apparent to us that 2 of those, and the reason I used the phrase appear to be abandoned, the 2 of them seem to be not being worked on actively at the moment, while the other 2 are to a greater or lesser extent, is that the department publishes its sort of forward work plan for the term, and these 2 strategies don't appear on it, while the other 2 do. So that's where that kind of putting 2 and 2 together came from. And we've spoken to the Equality Commission about this, and their understanding is the same, based on the same evidence, that it's not that anybody has said we are not going to work on those, but they also haven't said they are going to work on them, while they have said they are on the other 2. So, it's the feeling that, like, if somebody comes back to it, it might well be after this term ends, because it's not in the forward work plan at the moment.
The letters did kind of specifically say that that a detailed timeline for the publication and advancements of the gender equality strategy and the LGBTQI+ strategy would follow in the coming months, and that was in October. The 11th of October, this letter is dated. Sorry, I have it up, and we haven't heard sight nor sound of either of these strategies since. Yeah. And as Elaine said, it doesn't really appear to be on the agenda in terms of the forward work for the department.
Mm-hmm. So just to clarify, is your understanding that all 4 co-design groups have been terminated? Is that
yes,
right?
That's my understanding. All 4 received the same letter.
And you were told that, again, just to clarify, in the letter you received that it would be progressed in the coming months, or that they would let you know in the coming months? They would outline
a timetable.
They would set out a timescale
in the coming months. That was 5 months ago, October 24th.
As members of what might be now called the former co-design group, you're not expecting to be informed, or are you expecting to be informed, or you don't know if you'll be informed?
My understanding from the letter was that they might tell us. We were on, I can't speak for the other social inclusion strategies on this one, but there is a gender equality unit within DFC who we are on their mailing list. So intermittently they will send us out emails about matters related to gender equality, not the strategy, but gender equality with a lowercase g and e. And so we are there in terms of if they wanted to disseminate the information, they have a route to do so. I would have expected that, that we might be informed. But even if we are not to be informed, but to find out in some other way, we are, to be fair, this is part of our role to keep an eye on what departments are doing and what's upcoming for across all departments, just as a matter of course. and we know that it's not in the forward work plan as it currently stands.
I also think there's an issue as well, and this isn't just for the gender equality strategy, but for all four of them, is that, and it hasn't really been a secret based off of the past 4 years, that this process wasn't really co-design. And there was issues with the co-design process that all four groups had. But I think I could, understand what you're saying, where now the co-design groups, all four of them, have been dissolved essentially. So, maybe why should we be involved, continuing on forward? Why should we get a time scale? But at the end of the day, our names are on this strategy. Our names are, it will say that we've worked on this strategy. And I think you can kind of, you can imagine how, we've put out what we think is a very strong, clear position paper, which highlights short-term, medium-term, and long-term asks that were low cost, no cost to a bit longer, higher cost options. But obviously, it's up to the department now to determine how that will be fit into a strategy. And they may decide that half the things that we think would be really prioritised within the strategy won't be, but our names will still be on it. So I think you could see how, even within the anti-poverty and disability groups, that maybe there is a more likelihood that they'll see a strategy sooner than the other two groups. That there's a bit of a fear that when a strategy is published, or even a draft strategy is published with all of our names on it, or with the respective groups' names on it, that we'll see something that we didn't actually support, and without any sort of space or room to actually return to those conversations with department officials and, either support things that they have put into the strategies, or, have conversations around why things were not put in, and to, again, reiterate why we think certain things should be prioritized. So
I think personally I would expect to be informed as somebody who participated, but I don't know whether I will be.
Yeah. Well, no, well, it's clearly there's questions that we'll be able to ask, to see updates. And you did acknowledge, even in the programme for government, the number of things which were on your list, which have progressed. Well, not just in the programme for government, but even previously, ending violence against women and girls, childcare, and other priorities. But no, thanks for that clarification, and obviously we will follow this up. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Kelly, a brief supplementary?
Just a very quick supplementary following on from Brian. You've mentioned there about your names will be on the strategy. I'm a little bit confused by that, because the strategy isn't written yet. And with the letter that you have received basically saying that your role in this is finished, the strategy will be produced, I'm assuming then, without your final sort of sign-off or agreement. Are you happy to have your names on something like that? Because I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot barge pole.
There's huge concern across the sector that the work that we last had our hands on, if you will, was October of 2022. Obviously, some things have moved on for the better, some things have moved on for the worst. And what might come out of this might be so unrecognisable in terms of what we actually worked on. The reputational damage, as well as just general frustration, but the reputational damage that it could do to our organisations if the recommendations that come out are unrecognisable, or actually we think maybe even counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve, is significant. So this is the reason why we were very eager to meet with either the Minister or with officials. We would have been happy with anything like that, to stress that our position paper is our position paper, and that if additional things are sort of transposed on top or moved around or taken out, it won't be the position paper that we agreed. And so signed off. So we wouldn't want our names and our organisations on that.
Just finally on that, I know that I worked in the community and voluntary sector, and the old DRD attempted that, and I said, do not put my organisation's name on that, because as you have said, the harm on the ground, because politicians will say, but you signed it, you agreed to it, or the community and voluntary sector, other groups that you're women that you're, and other genders that you're supposed to be helping will go, you signed this off. That's very dangerous, because it undermines charitable law and the fact that you have aims and objectives that may be undermined by the document.
And I think it's good to reiterate what Claire said before, is that all these organisations are really keen to, not only salvage, what work we've kind of left in 2022, but to continue the process and see, each of these social inclusion strategies through. So it's not that this process to us, I suppose, is dead in the water. You know, we want to continue this, and we want to create something that will actually make change and can be implemented.
Very brief, right?
You know, it will be brief. No, I think it's a valid point that you made, and as Kelly has said, so people who don't know what is the co-design process. So from what you're saying is almost like you were making an input up to a stage, and then it goes into a departmental process, and ultimately it becomes a political process, because ultimately it needs a political vote from the Assembly.
Yes.
But yes, if there's things in it that you're not content with, because it's left your hands, you know, and whether co-design is a misleading term, then, you know, if people feel your hands have been on this throughout the whole process, you know, maybe you were an advisory group at one stage, but and co-design is a good concept, but ultimately it has to become a political process. You know, it needs to be elected representatives, you know, make decisions about public money and public policy. You know.
Of course, and I think the difference between, like, if you look at the co-design process involving the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy as a good model of co-design, at every stage when the officials took it away to work on what were a mountain of kind of disparate ideas and turn it into a plan, at every stage they came back to us and said, is this making sense to you? Are we doing this in the right order? Is there something that we need to move around? At every stage they came back to us, and they were extremely in close communication with us at all times. If there was something you were uncomfortable with or something you felt needed changed, they took it on board, and everything was a part of an open discussion. There was no part of me that when I opened the final document was surprised by what I found inside. I felt like I had last had my hands on it, you know, right before it went to print.
And if I may, and I think, you know, we talked about this before, it's important to say that the officials involved in this process were doing their job under extreme pressure. And in no way are we suggesting that one co-design process was better than another because of, you know, the work of individuals and departments. So I think it's important to say that and to have that on the record as well.
And on that, just while it is also important that this is political decision, you know, ultimately these decisions on all of these strategies will be made by politicians, by the executive. The reason that co-design was so important for all of these different strategies is that the community and voluntary sector so often are the ones doing the work on the ground within the communities. I mean, your trade union has over 50% of women as members. You know, Women's Resource and Development Agency works with women's centres across Northern Ireland. We work with LGBTQI+ communities. So the expertise is there, and that's why it's so important that we are involved throughout that process. And that's why I think, you know, we did make that process richer, and the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, I think that process was richer for the involvement of the organisations represented here.
Yeah, and again, it brings me back to I suppose the open, that concept of co-design is only effective and valuable if it's included in the work. It really, you know, so that's where the real value lies. Otherwise, it's a meaningless process, and it shouldn't. And we are committed as an executive and an assembly to co-design and co-production of these. And I suppose it reminds me of that saying that culture will eat policy for breakfast. In a sense, it's about creating a culture of welcoming and engaging. And actually, it shouldn't even be a one-off. It should always be reiterative, where the groups who have the expertise are being, even after the strategy, in terms of reviewing how it's being implemented. So that's the general point. In relation to that point around just overall culture, and you mentioned at the start of the meeting around question time, and I think you'd indicated that you had some concerns about the Minister's response to the detail of some of these policies, strategies and question time. In relation to the language used in that response, did you have any concerns or observations?
Nothing in particular. It's more. It's not so much the language as the short shrift, I suppose, that the answers were brief, and not really much you could get your teeth into.
Okay, well listen, thank you. Really useful update on where it is. Some really concerning, I have to say, messages, and I think that will be something that the committee will want to pick up on now in terms of further actions. But I want to thank you for your work that you have done to strategy date, for your work here this morning, and for your commitment, which I know remains, to remain involved and remain as helping us as an assembly to deliver these strategies and the outcomes that they're designed to deliver. Gormila Maya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you. Okay, members, so yeah, a couple of things there that I want to touch on before I come to members. I think there's a couple of things. I thought there was a really very well made point around the programme for government not everything being in the programme for government, but that depends on departments taking forward the other pieces. And in light of what we're hearing, that would give me concern around the strategies being abandoned in the words of this group. I thought it was really significant to hear from a group which represents, a significant section of society. We don't matter. That's a really concerning thing to hear as a committee, and you can understand why they would say that in the context of which we're dealing with around the thing. So I think one of the things that I would like to know is, well, first of all, I would like to see sight of that letter sent to the co-design groups to see how that was framed. I don't recall seeing that. So could we request that if members are agreed? I think we should actually write to TEO in relation to concerns that these around the programme for government and the fact that these policies, these strategies are now not being developed, that we write to TEO to express concern around the integrated need for these as a package to be brought forward.
Just on that point about TEO, can we perhaps also include in that they maybe look at agreed terms of reference for when they're bringing groups in to engage as stakeholders, that then there's a clear understanding as to what's required of them and how they'll be kept engaged in the process. I think it's important that's done right across departments.
Yep, members content with that. I would also like now updated timelines. We're told that now, in light of the fact that they're not being prioritised at this stage, what are the timelines for these strategies? If members are content, we seek those. And I also would like an understanding of what work is ongoing at official level. We've been indicated there is some work ongoing. I think we need a very detailed outline of what that work is and the extent of that work and how that's feeding into those timelines. Kelly?
On that last point, I would like to know how many civil servants are working on each of the strategies, because the indication seems to be that there is ongoing work being done by the civil service for the minister, but I need to know how many different civil servants. It's not a case that there be a team maybe of 10 and they're working on all the strategies. How many individual civil servants are working on the gender equality, the LBG, all of them, just to make sure. The other thing, what I would like to ask, if we as a committee could write to the head of the civil service to ask them for their guidelines that are issued to civil servants on the delivery of any programmes that are co-production and co-design, so that we can see what format should be followed, because I find it astonishing that before a programme is ended, that the groups that have been contributing to it are removed from that process. And I would also like to find, there was something that was said that's not true. We don't get to vote on a final strategy. The minister brings the strategy to the House and it's delivered. We don't get to vote on it. So therefore, I don't want my fingerprints anywhere near that strategy if the co-production and co-design groups aren't involved in it, because it's being written by who? Civil servants? Do they know the lived experience of these people? So I think that there would need to be clarification. Are these groups being led to believe that a political process will happen where we will all get to agree the strategy?
But your party will be in the executive, where ultimately it'll end up.
And if our party says no, Brian?
Well, then that's part of the political
yes, but
process.
It'll not
Chair,
be,
please.
It'll not be for us to decide on that strategy. It will be presented fait accompli to us. And I'm concerned that in light of what we have heard as a committee today, there are experts who have been excluded from that end process, and whatever is going to be produced will not have their fingerprints on it. That's not co-production and co-design. So could I ask maybe for the department if they will provide, in absence of the co-production and co-design or co-design working groups, that we have sight of that strategy before it goes public from the minister, because I think we need to step in and make sure that it's going to meet those people's needs if they're not involved in it.
Yeah, and members agreed with content with that proposal. And I think we should take a significant look at our position when we get that letter back that's been sent to the co-design groups, because I'm not content that that's something the committee would necessarily agree with.
Yeah,
Daniel,
sure.
then Alan, Andy?
I disagree with anything that Kelly has outlined. I have to say I'm not surprised or shocked by what I've heard, to be honest with you. We have a minister in place that there's a trend emerging. He picks the things he wants to deal with, the easy way out, and leaves the things that he probably most likely disagrees with or has a strong sense of feeling on, and leaves it to the side. You know, we have the same with Irish language strategy. We have the same with various other important elements around the GAA. And now we're looking at the LGBTQ plus strategy, the gender equality strategy, all things where the minister hasn't exactly been at the races on in terms of progressing them. So, you know, I think we should be conscious as a committee of reminding the minister that he is the minister for communities, and he has an obligation to the entire community to see these things through. In relation to the point that Kelly raises about, you know, work ongoing, you know, that simple text on a page trying to provide us with the reassurance that work is happening is not good enough. We've seen how this particular department falls short in terms of actually delivering on any of their commitments. And we've seen actually as well, when it came to the anti-poverty strategy, how that co-design group was mistreated and ignored continuously over a period of time until they were brought before this committee and indeed the Public Accounts Committee and were spoken with. So there's a trend here, particularly with the current minister, unfortunately, which I hope in time I'm proven wrong, although I'll not hold my breath. But I think we need to remind him that he has a responsibility here, and kicking the can down the road and thinking that he can ignore these important elements is just unacceptable in every way, shape or form. What I've heard today doesn't surprise me or shock me in the slightest. It's directly in line with the attitude of this minister, to be honest with you.
Members content we reflect those concerns?
Chair, could we also ask for an update? Because I think some of the comments are really politics and unfair on the minister. So if we could ask for an update of where he is at with this strategy and what work he has done, would be more fair, I think.
That was probably partly what we were hoping to get today in relation to the deferred briefing. So we wanted absolutely to give the department their place in that, but they deferred for a second time that briefing. So I just I suppose flag that. Yep. Okay, members, there's one other item that arose there that I think maybe is one of relevance as well. We were told that there is no data around homelessness and LGBTQI+. I think that is something that we should seek clarification on. Like, data was never more easily collected and analysed than this, and that's a significant gap, I think, given what I accept are probably huge risks of overlap there. So I think it would be worthwhile writing to probably the department in the first instance to see, are they aware of that, and can they look at how that data might be started to be collected in the time ahead, if members are content.
I would agree, but I have a concern about collecting data, that it just sits there. You've got the information, but you don't do anything with it, and there's no outcomes. And that's something that I would be concerned about, no matter what the issue is that we collect data on. What's the outcome? And how do we measure the outcome? And how long, what time frame do we have before we start to measure?
Well, I suppose for me, the outcome would be that then that information gets fed into all of these much needed strategies and into government policy. That you then, once you understand, because you have to, what gets measured gets done. So if you don't realise there's a problem or you're not collecting that data, then you don't put a focus on addressing it. So you can't address it effectively without knowing the scale of it. So I think you're right. There's no point, and I wouldn't be in favour of collecting data just to know it. What I would want the data collected for is to be able to act upon it. So, Kelly?
Just going to say that if you collect data, then that establishes objective need, and that was what is supposed to be in all of those strategies. If only we had a strategy, but we're not getting the strategy to even ask those people to collect the data, to feed it in, to fulfil the strategy's outcomes.
Andy, you were...
Yeah, no, Chair, I just think, obviously, from what we've heard from all of the co-design groups, etc., that all of the strategies are clearly important and they're cross-cutting. So if maybe we could just get a reminder from the department as to the thought process and rationale as to why they took certain strategies forward first, especially given what I've heard here today in that they're all cross-cutting. And they're pretty much mutually exclusive, so I think that's important to get a better understanding, indeed for those groups to get an understanding as to the thought process and rationale.
Yep, members content with that?
Yes.
Clerk, are you content with all that information? Okay, members, so we're going to take a short break now to allow to get the room set up for that. There's obviously significant translation and that taking place for the next session. So we'll take a 6-minute break there and resume at 11:40, please, members. Thank you.
She confirmed open.
Okay, Shin.
Thank you very much, members. And an updated copy of the briefing paper is available at page 29 of the tabled papers. And members, a reminder that Seacht na Gaeilge is currently taking place and that this is the largest celebration of Irish language and culture, with events taking place throughout Ireland and across the world. So I welcome the following representatives to the meeting. Cushlan Liam, Language Rights Coordinator of Conor na Gaeilge, Crothar O'Mody, Advocacy Manager with Conor na Gaeilge, and Dr. Padraig O'Tierney, Communications Manager of Conor na Gaeilge. So, Padraig, I invite you to make a brief opening statement before we move to questions from members. Thank you.
Good morning, all. It is nice to be back here for you today. To start, we would like to thank you for the invitation to represent Conor na Gaeilge. It is especially apt that we are meet during Seacht na Gaeilge. I am Cushlan Liam, and with me are my colleagues Conor O'Mody and Padraig O'Tierney. It's very important to us that we can conduct our business with the state in our native tongue, and we would wish to acknowledge and thank the interpretation staff here at Stormont who are facilitating the session. Before we move on, we have to highlight the two major developments that have happened in the past few weeks. At the end of February, the 1737 Act, which banned the use of Irish in our courts, and it was in place from the era of penal laws, was finally repealed. And then at the beginning of this week, the recruitment process was finally published for the role of an Irish Language Commissioner, two great historical milestones. We have plenty to discuss today. Our written evidence has been provided as part of your information packs, which will provide more comprehensive context and overview, especially for our two main questions, the Irish language strategy and the ongoing funding crisis. Crothar will bring you up to speed on the North Sound funding situation, but before I hand over to Paddy to talk about the Irish language strategy. Good morning. As set out in your packs, the Irish language strategy is a commitment that was first made by way back at the St Andrews Agreement in 2006. From that, there is now a statutory provision as part of the 1998 Act under the Section 28D. This legal duty has yet to be fulfilled. The New Decade, New Approach Agreement of 2020 promised that a draft strategy would be ready within 6 months. This commitment was also not fulfilled. Conor na Gaeilge took two judicial reviews in 2017 and 2022 on this issue, and in each case got a ruling that the executive has in fact failed to introduce a strategy, with the later declaration urging that executive to act with expedition. Conor na Gaeilge is co-chair of the co-design group dealing with the development of the strategy, and between November 2021 and November 2023 we prepared a comprehensive action plan representative of needs of the Irish language community based on best practice, a strategy that would bring around significant interventions assisting the current language revival process currently underway. Those recommendations must be a key foundation to the new strategy. Currently, we are waiting for the Minister to submit a draft strategy. The Minister recently failed to give any commitment or indication to his committee that there will be a strategy in place during the current mandate. He said that the cross-departmental working group is looking at what they can do. Just to clarify, clarify to the committee, our records show this group started working in March 2022, 3 years ago, and possibly even further back since. If you look at a section 41 from a question from yourself, Chair, the Minister claimed that the detailed timing for this work is to a large degree outside of department's control. We simply do not accept that. The Minister could and should provide guidance and accompanying timeline and guidance directing to the work as to be completed as a matter of urgency. Whilst we continue to converse with representatives from the department, it's very disappointing the Minister himself will not meet us. To date, the Minister has not accepted any of the 3 meetings we asked for to discuss the strategy and funding issues. We noted the victory of the CAJ in the High Court last week that the Executive failed in their duty to introduce an anti-poverty strategy. At the Ardèche of Conwy na Gaeilge a month ago, an emergency resolution was passed directing us to return back to the courts. We today notify the committee that we intend to start a new legal progress to undertake our 3rd judicial review against the Executive's failure to introduce an Irish language strategy after almost 20 years. My colleague Crahar Moody will now say a few words on the funding crisis. Morning. There are important funding issues that we want to discuss today, especially as they relate to the north-south funding difficulties in the sector with Forest na Gaeilge and with the department. Forest na Gaeilge is now operating with less funding than it had in 2003, and when you include inflation, this is actually a 45% real-time cut. Forest na Gaeilge announced at the end of January significant cuts to the tune of €820,000. Irish language groups from all over this island went on strike a fortnight ago, protesting against the lack of funding available to Forest na Gaeilge. These groups are all under huge pressure, some of them on their last legs. This is an emergency, a crisis, but there is an elephant in the room. The money is there and it is available. I assure you, in spite of what the Ministers claim, the crisis is much deeper than what pension matters. We are of the opinion that Forest na Gaeilge's funding model is broken and urgently is amended and changed. This was recognised at the North-South Ministerial Council meeting in September last year, and an agreement was agreed which would provide flexibility for any of the 2 governments to put additional money towards the cross-border organisation, in addition to the existing baseline which sees 75% as funding come from the south and 25% from the north. We understand that this agreement was accepted in the south, but in the north, when the previous finance minister put forward the paper, that the Deputy First Minister blocked it from the Executive's agenda 6 times. This is a huge disappointment. When there is significant additional money available from the Irish Government, free of charge to the government here, and it would solve a lot of our funding problems to the community groups. You will find more detail on this issue in your packs. In conclusion, these are our official requests that we propose today. That this community continues to seek a clear and reasonable timescale for the completion of the final stages of the strategy co-design process, that representative members of the co-design group for the Irish language strategy would be invited before the committee to present priorities and concerns of that body, and we ask you to urgently press the Office of First Minister and Deputy First Minister to amend the funding mechanism for Forest na Gaeilge or find another way to resolve the current funding crisis outside of Forest na Gaeilge. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And there will be a lot to discuss there. Firstly, given that the Northern Ireland Act 1998 legally requires the adoption of an Irish language strategy, and 2 High Court rulings, 2017 and 2022, found, and maybe even another one coming up, found that the Executive is in breach of this duty. What specific barriers, political or even on the administrative side, do you believe are preventing progress, and what steps should be taken to resolve that? Thank you very much for that, Colm. And we will continue answering your questions. Even if you ask a question in English, we will continue in Irish. As you say, Colm, this is a legal commitment in the 1998 Act to bring in the strategy. We cannot escape from that. It is a fact. It is also a fact, as we sit here, that there is no strategy. When we look back at the road we have travelled, this co-design process began back in 2020. Now, no strategy should take 5 years. At this point, we should be 4 or 5 years into the life cycle of that strategy. But we aren't even at the point of having a draft strategy. That is a complete and utter failure. When we look back at the timescales that were given for other strategies, I'm talking about social inclusion strategies, it was said at that time that it would take 14 months to develop those strategies from start to finish. We are now talking about 5 years here. So we don't understand the delay. Conor na Gaeilge and myself have been working along with the co-design group for 4 years on this from October 2020. Our work here is done. The Minister is now saying that the cross-departmental working group is working on this. They started in March 2022. We do not understand why is nobody in the department or the Minister happy to say to us, this will take 3 months, this piece will take some months, we will be finished in such a time. And when we look at the CAJ ruling that they got a few days ago, I would like to read this out, because this is going to be the basis of our third judicial review that Conor na Gaeilge will lodge. Here's what the judge said, Justice Humphreys last said about the anti-poverty strategy.
Conclusion is that the Executive Committee is in breach of Section 28E, duty to adopt an anti-poverty strategy. He stressed the need for the current administration to act with alacrity when there have been egregious failings on the part of previous incarnations. The focus must be on outcome rather than means. And the unfortunate position is that there is in existence no adopted strategy.
If we take a new case, we will win. Thank you very much. And one other question from myself, and then I will move to the other members. The expert advisory panel of the Council of Europe has repeatedly called for urgent action on the Irish Language Strategy and the full implementation of the Identity and Language Act 2022. What mechanisms should be introduced to ensure greater accountability and compliance with international commitments? Thank you, Chairperson. And so I think in September last year, we did send out COMEX's report and shared it with the committee. And among the urgent recommendations they had was the implementation of the legislation and the bringing in of an Irish language strategy. As Cushla said, this was we are very happy to see that the Commissioner process is beginning finally, something that was committed to back in NDNA, but again we see plenty of delay there too. Although we have the have legislation and that is going to lay down rules for public bodies, we look at this strategy as a roadmap, if you like, so that we can take the revival of the Irish language from where we are to where we want to go. Whenever the co-design committee wrote to the Minister in November, of course we never got any answer to that correspondence up until this point. We impressed upon the Minister how important it was to have deadlines for the strategies. And one of the things that we are very worried about, some of the things that we have impressed upon the Minister and indeed the Department, it's in your strategies. We look at how Wales are proceeding. They're looking for 1 million Welsh speakers. We look at how they are trying to increase Welsh language immersion education, whereas in the north we're talking. We have no such figures in our strategy. To come back to your question, we are very worried whenever we see the length of time it took to get the anti-poverty strategy off the ground. We are worried that the recommendations that came from the expert panel will be thrown in the bin, and that we are looking at how our process is going. We're worried that the recommendations that we made will be set aside, and that there will be a strategy that won't make any difference on the ground. If we are going to take this amount of time to produce a statement, it has to be good. It has to be strong, and it has to be resourced. If we don't do that, it's a complete waste of time, and we will not be happy with that, to accept that. And on a practical level, with regard to the expert report, it is that every year whenever we look at the COMEX report, it's one of the most important documents we have and we see that year on year the British government have failed to provide figures for their responsibility towards the Irish language. And so, with regard to political blocks, with regard to the strategy, the Irish language strategy that was tried to be put on the agenda 26 times by the Communities Minister, and that was blocked 26 times. And again, we see our Deputy First Minister hoping to block plans to change the financing structures of Forras na Gaeilge. It is very clear to us where the political blockage is for the Irish language. So when it's very clear that those political blockages stop with the DUP. Thank you very much for that. I'm now moving to Melissa, and then Shan, and then Brian. Melissa, please, if you want to ask a question. Thank you very much. You're very welcome, and it's nice to welcome you here again here today. And a few things I'd like to mention. What effect is the Minister's failure to deliver the long-term promised Irish language strategy having on your abilities as an organisation to develop language in the North? So the buck stops with the executive, but the basic commitments really fall to the DFC. So the duty is devolved from the executive to DFC. 5 years on from the latest commitment was given on this matter, we don't think it is satisfactory that we don't have a strategy. We don't think it's satisfactory that we don't even have a draft strategy. That draft strategy then has to go to the executive, has to go for public consultations. There would be questions about costing. But as I said here before, Melissa, our work here is done. our work has been done for 4 years, and I'm not talking about a few meetings over a couple of months. We're talking about daily meetings, many hours of work on this. We have put a lot of work into this, invested a lot of time, and we are exhausted with this strategy. And the only reason we are still in the room, and the co-design group, the other members want to walk out, but we think and we believe we can bring forward a strong Irish language strategy. But I think that co-design group are ready to walk out the door as a sign of their frustration. We're asking them not to do that. We're going back to the courts. We do not understand, with 2 High Court rulings under our belt, this is still not a ministerial priority. We don't see any priority being given to this matter. There's no urgency here. And whenever the Minister is refusing openly to provide us with a timescale, what does that say to us? Even if he were to say to us, look at the PFC, even in there it doesn't say that we will finish this strategy. It only says that the work will continue. So we are in very shaky ground here with regard to this strategy. We don't see that it is making any headway, and it's not going anywhere fast. And if it doesn't, we are going back to the courts. It's a shame that he doesn't meet with you, and you have done great work. Conor na Gaeilge, week on week, has done great work. Not only during Seachtain na Gaeilge, but every week of the year. And so, what way will the cuts of Forras na Gaeilge have on your ability to operate your programmes in the communities? And I will let Crocher mention this. But one point you mentioned there, Melissa, about the Minister not being happy to meet with us. I would like to put on record that we wrote to the Minister in February last year asking for a meeting. We got an official rejection. He said that there were no spaces on his agenda to answer these questions. Again, as a co-design group, we wrote to them. We wanted to share our worries, our concerns. We didn't even get an answer to that correspondence. A few weeks ago, we wrote to him for the 3rd time, and a few days ago, we got our answer that I will not be answering. I will not be meeting with you. We don't believe that is satisfactory. What we want to say, basically, that we're worried. We have expectations here. We would like to discuss these, because at some point we're going to have to make decisions. He will have to make decisions. The anti-poverty strategy had one strategy, and the Minister had his own strategy, and they were very different. But if the Minister wants to take, for the Irish language community to take ownership of this question, he has to show interest in the subject, and we're very worried that he's not accepting our invitations. Forras na Gaeilge, as you know, was set up after the Good Friday Agreement. They had 17.16 million of a budget back then. They now have 16.9 million, so they have less money now than they had 20 years ago. The monies that go from Forras na Gaeilge to groups has actually dropped by 45% over 20 years. Now, I don't see any other sector where we have a 45% drop is accepted. Whenever you speak to community groups, these are groups that operate through Irish. They stopped summer schemes and schemes for youth. These are the same groups who work and operate through Irish. They are now taking the decision whether they either turn on lights, turn on heat, or cut down on their service, because this is very difficult. because the demand for the Irish language is increasing. We see people, because of the likes of NECAP, wanting to learn Irish, but at the same time these groups are having to make a decision to reduce their budgets and to make cuts. So it's incredible that at one level there is a flourish in Irish language, people are enjoying it, but on the other level people are having to make decisions, very difficult decisions about heating, whether to pay people's wages, and that has been the way over a 20-year period. A 20-year period when we did not see proper funding of these groups. So whenever you have a group that has now got less money than it had 20 years ago, you have to ask the question, what's going wrong here? From day to day, the money is simply not coming in. And I am a chairperson of Splona Mona, which provides services for children with SEN. And again, we have to make cuts to those services. Thank you for that. Shan, if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, and I did not realise at the start my son attends a Common Oiga that is funded by Forest na Gaeilge, so I just wanted to put that on record. Agus Garmayogov, Golirash.
Thank you very much for being here today. I apologise. I will not be able to speak Irish like Melissa and Colm, but I am learning.
That I just wanted to ask, I suppose very, very similar to the presentation that we received before around the time and hours involved in the co-design. You've mentioned, Paddy, there about how often you were meeting on an almost daily basis. I think it would be useful to put a figure on that if we can, whether that's around just the hours of meetings and looking at a living wage rate to understand just how much of your resources have been put into this co-design process. In terms of your Conradh na Gaeilge have repeatedly emphasised the need for measurable targets in the strategy, and I'm just wondering if you can outline how the removal of some of those census-based targets weakens the potential impact of the strategy. You talked about the practical consequences, and I see it in my own community in terms of the funding that is received, whether that's by community groups or the Common Oiga. But is there any other I suppose the consequences, the positive consequences that we could see with improved funding in terms of that Forest na Gaeilge offering? And in relation to that Forest na Gaeilge funding, I know that the issue that had been raised by the Deputy First Minister as an answer to why she wasn't accepting the Finance Minister's point would have been the impact on the north-south balance of involvement and around those ratios. Is there anything that you can speak to around that in terms of your own assessment, whether the south putting more money into that agreement, what impact would that then have, do you foresee, I suppose, on the outplanes of that? And then my last question is just around public confidence. And I've obviously heard from yourselves. You were one of the groups that had contacted me, quite similar to the women's policy group, around the lack of engagement and denial of meetings. What has the impact of the repeated denial of meetings with yourselves and other Irish language activists by the minister had on I suppose that wider Irish speaking community?
Thank you, Shan. And I'll start with the last question. I suppose the effect of that failure with regard to the minister to accept our meetings and even to write back saying thanks but no thanks, you lose confidence. You lose hope that the department has any interest in the issue. We have been working with the officials in the we've been working with Ian Greenway, and we have a very good working relationship with Ian, and that work continues apace. But as you know, there's nothing quite like meeting with the Minister. At the end of the day, it's the Minister who will make the decision what will end up in the final strategy. So really we have to speak to the Minister. If you don't get to do that, you lose confidence very quickly that they have any interest in doing this properly. And we want to be open about that. I've been doing a few quick maths, but you're talking about hundreds of hours of labour. It would be very difficult to give you a ballpark figure. We've been meeting with people in the DFC in the Gaeltacht area quarter from 9 o'clock to 9, from 9 to 5. You're looking at papers from week to week. It is a huge undertaking, and I have to give great praise and to the 12 groups like Forest na Gaelic, na Gaeilge, Corley na Gael Scoileachta, Glór na Móna, and Dram Jarrig, Turris, they're all on the co-design group, and they all worked very hard on this and sharing their expertise and missing out on other work that they probably should be doing over that 4-year period. We are losing our confidence in this process. You mentioned deadlines, Sean. Of course, whenever the expert advisory panel report was published in February 2022, the first stage of the co-design process that Deirdre Hargery, MLA, took at the time, there were overarching targets, and the expert group said that there should be overarching targets, and those overarching targets were taken out. We were told we are not allowed to have them, and we impressed upon the department that we were not happy to accept that. I mentioned before about the Welsh the ambitious plans, which has that it has a very clear strategy, and it's not enough to say we want more Gael Scoilna. We need to have a figure with that. If we're going to make a strategy, there has to be action, there has to be a budget, and there has to be a time lane, because you have to work towards something. So in 2022, they were saying in Wales, in Ireland, the expert group said 500,000 people with an ability in Irish within 20 years, 20,000 people with Irish as their main language, and increasing the IME to 10% of the overall school population. So it is very important to return to that process, Sean. And if we look, for example, at the housing strategy that the Minister himself announced recently, he was talking about 33,000 social housings by the year 2039. We're talking, we was talking about thousands of children being able to access childcare benefits. So there are plenty of deadlines and targets in there. So why can't we have targets in our strategy? And so maybe Crocker might want to come in at this point. And with regard to the Irons, one of the biggest things that we have worked on in many years was this strategy. Whenever Paddy talks about hundreds of our man-hours, we have spent hundreds of hours. We're passionate about Irish. We are happy to do that. We're happy to be part of that work. But the Minister can't take an hour to discuss these issues with us. So the work that we have put in, I've put in all that work, and still the Minister can't afford us that time. With regard to the ratios of fund financing, 75% comes from the south, 25% from the north. That is not working. For a year, we have a systematic crisis in Forras na Gaeilge. They, as I said before, they have less money today than they had in 2003. That was recognised at the highest levels of government. People in this within Forras na Gaeilge, within the civil service, they recognised that we had a problem. So in the NSMC meeting in September, they recognised that they needed a short-term way of resolving this issue, and to bring in a funding mechanism that would allow one state to put in extra money to help those problems. That happened in September 2024 because there was no agreement in that. Because of the lack of agreement, there's now 820,000 euro of cuts coming down the line. And we are now trying to tackle the funding crisis, not only in the north but in the south. And without taking in other points, we are just talking about keeping our heads above water, keeping our doors open. We had a strike action last week, a few weeks ago, and they're coming to us that we have to make a decision. Do we turn on the lights? Do we turn on the heat? Or do we pay our workers' pensions? That's something that that happens in no other sector. We understand that there are cuts left and right, but that there are difficulties with funding. But the southern government are telling us, here's €1 million. You don't have to give the same amount of funding. Here's free money. And it appears to us that that is being blocked by the Deputy First Minister. But she won't even allow this onto the agenda. That's incredible. Because groups on the coalface are struggling. So the priority number one is to keeping the doors open, keeping the summer schemes going, and then we can talk about the extra work we would like to do after that. And a very quick point with regard to public confidence. I think this time last year when we came before you, we expressed upon you the point, the need to restore public confidence in this process that had been lost over 20 years. And so I can now say more confidently today than at that time that the public confidence has now been completely lost. Thank you. We're now going to Brian.
And you're very welcome to the committee. I want to ask you about one of the aims on page 2 of your document, and thank you for it, to increase the visibility of the Irish language on road and street signs. As you'll be aware, on Belfast City Council there was a long-standing policy of permitting dual language street signs, most often in Irish, where a clear majority of residents wish to have those. However, that policy was changed a few years ago by Nationalist Party and the Alliance Party to reduce the threshold down to just 15%. And I strongly feel that this has actually increased tensions in areas that are quietly mixed and where it is damaging community relations. Do you acknowledge that residents do have the right not to want Irish street signs, which many view as cultural branding of their area, and that these should not be imposed politically, where a majority of residents who have replied have said that they do not want them?
I'll
take that question. Thank you for that. I think it's important, first of all, to understand where the 15% recommendation came in Belfast, and we think that that came from our policies. Our policies come from international experts and that coincides with the 15% of the special repertoire for 2017. That amount was lessened in Belfast because Irish, of course, is a minority language, and of course, minority languages should not be dependent on majorities. That's not the way things are, and it should never have been a referendum. So if there was enough demand for that street sign, and that's where we came to the 15%, and we should remember that Irish is for everyone, and it doesn't matter if it's different councils, like in Armagh, Bantbridge and Craigavon. If that if the demand meets the threshold of 6%, it seems to be that the DUP are the ones who are blocking, and I think also that most of the time what we see with blocks on the Irish language is to a lack of information. We must normalise the Irish language, and I think the last point was made there, and I accept the question, Brian. Thank you. We have an example in Armagh, Bantbridge, Craigavon at the minute, where 87% of the street were looking to sign in Irish, and 3% weren't, and 3% ended up winning, and the sign wasn't implemented. And we want to see how equality and justice is put into this question. We want, if I can question you, Bran, what figure yourself would you give for a threshold to meet for a sign? Would you say 50%? We don't see that DUP are treating this question fairly. One stance in Belfast, one stance in Armagh, one stance in the Glens of Antrim, one stance in the North Coast. It's clear to us that there's not a universal stance for the DUP on this question, especially whenever minority languages are looking for their rights. That's a question for you, Brian.
Well, it's a policy which is set by each council, and it's devolved to each council to set their threshold. Regarding the 15%, I mean, that is ridiculously low. When we're told this has come from international examples, it's probably in situations where you have different language groups where people can't speak each other's languages. Everyone, with respect, everyone who speaks Irish speaks English as well. People have every right to speak Irish, to enjoy it and to use it, and it's part of all of our cultural heritage. I get that. It's one of 5 Celtic languages in the British Isles, and 6 if you include Breton in France. So I understand it's part of our cultural wealth, but it is also linked to people's identity, culture, and there's a political aspect to it. So when it is being imposed against the wishes of residents, I will speak out against that, and my party will speak about it. And I'll give you 2 examples. At a vote at Belfast City Council Committee last week, in my constituency, North Belfast, Sunningdale Park North, 22 residents said they were for an Irish street sign, 33 were against, but that was pushed through by nationalist parties. And Ben Madigan Park South, 22 were for an Irish street sign, 26 were against, and that was pushed through by nationalist parties. So in both cases, a majority of residents didn't want it, as they're entitled to have that view. But it was so. My question is, when signs are being voted through politically by nationalist parties and against the majority wishes of residents and unionist representatives, do you not have concerns that this is only politicising, increasing the politicisation of the Irish language?
So, listen, no,
Yeah.
Kai,
we actually must move on. Brian, this is not on today's agenda, so I'm going to...
Daniel.
It's a pertinent issue.
Daniel.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks to each of you for being with us. I always enjoy your presentations. They're always very much to the point and completely honest. I have to say, as I've said to our previous witnesses, I am not shocked or surprised in the slightest, and I think you've put the hammer firmly on the nail in terms of where this is being blocked and by who. This is a political blockage, and it is happening squarely in the corner of the DUP. And I would like to say, Chair, as well, that language does not threaten any of us. It enriches our lives and our experiences. It says a lot about any individual that feels threatened by a particular language, because certainly it shouldn't be the case whatsoever. And I will say as well, Chair, because this is important for the record as well, if there's anyone politicising the Irish language, it's the DUP. There's no one else politicising this in any way, shape or form, and I want to put that firmly on the record. And it's not just by the comments that are made at this committee today, it's by the actions or inactions of the Minister that is responsible for carrying forward a strategy, and he's done nothing about it. And it's the height of bad manners and complete ignorance that the Minister has not taken the time to meet with yourselves, given the energy and the work that you've put in to getting us to the point that we're in. I understand your frustration. I feel it actually today, and that of many others as well. I've really nothing to add, only that you have my full support. We'll continue to advocate completely for you and to hold the Minister to account. But I do think, Chair, that it is for this committee to send a message to the Minister for Communities that this is entirely disgraceful behaviour and it's unacceptable in every single way. He cannot continue to get away with this and expect the support of this committee in other aspects of his choosing. This is unacceptable. And I'm fed up with good groups such as this one coming before us, telling us about the fantastic work they're doing in the community and how they've been hamstrung on funding, and how strategies such as this one, which is very, very important and which is a key commitment by the Executive, has not been brought forward. It is very, very frustrating, and it needs to be a very clear message from this committee that the behaviour of the Minister and nitpicking the things that he wants to take forward and leaving the other things that he finds are uncomfortable with on the sidelines is not acceptable whatsoever. It's very, very frustrating, but you have my support, and I'm very grateful for your honesty, to be honest, and keep that up and take the fight to the court if need be, because you'll have our full support.
Thank you for that, Daniel. That means a lot to get support from other parties around the table. If we look at the pages, if you want to look at the pages in your packs, the Irish community is growing. The language is stronger for younger communities, younger ages, so it will constantly start to grow. And we must have the right supports for this Irish language. It has to happen in this department, and we are not going to be happy to wait. This is a test for the commitment for the Minister. We got the invitation to come here today. We're not here for shouting to Gilligan, just to speak a couple of words in Irish and head home happy. We're here to challenge you and to tell you we are going to the courts for the third time. Now, we should be here maybe back in March next year to say we're going back for the fourth case. And it's something that we're just not going to take. We'll come back to that at the end of the meeting. And now I'm going to Nicola. Go on ahead, Nicola. Thank you, Colin. And hello, friends. I would like to welcome you here today. It's great that you're here, and I appreciate you being here. Apologise myself, I'm not there in person. I would like to ask you one question, and I have broken Irish at the minute, but I am going to ask in English.
Last month, the Irish language groups went on strike across the north in relation to the cuts to Forest na Gaeilge. Obviously, this indicates a serious frustration with how language is being funded here in the north. So I just wonder if the funding isn't resolved, what do you see as the next steps for the Irish language groups? And is there any indication of legal action being taken forward, or is that being considered at the minute?
Thank you for that, Nicola. We were on strike 2 weeks ago. That was the first strike ever in the Irish language community. And I think we were all frustrated. This is a huge step to go on strike. And we know that we are preparing for another demonstration on the 25th and 26th at Stormont. But we have an urgent question here. Irish language groups are throughout the country are struggling, and the Southern government has money. So we have to look at a mechanism to get that money into their pockets. How can we do that? And there's a practical question here. If the DUP continue with their blockage, if the Deputy First Minister is not happy to find a resolution to this problem with regard to the funding mechanism, what do we do? And we have to be think on our feet here. With regard to the Southern government, they have plenty of money, and can we look at other mechanisms for them to fund directly Irish language groups instead of going through Foras na Gaeilge? Because Foras na Gaeilge is broken with regard to as a funding mechanism. And so the question is, how can we get this money to the groups on the ground? Youth groups, community groups, people who are dealing with the community from day to day. It's an urgent question for us, and it is very difficult whenever we see these milestones been taken with regard to repealing the 1737 Act. But at the same time, Irish language groups can't even turn on lights or heat and provide youth services. So what is the point of all this legislative reform on a very historic level? But at the same time, groups on the ground who are doing the actual work from day to day can't even get any funding. So that is the challenge we put to the committee and the executive. This is 2025. How do we get money to the Irish language groups on the ground if Foras can't do that? And that is a challenge for the government, North and South. And Nicola, if the executive does not come up with a solution, if the OFM, DFM doesn't come up with a resolution, and if the Deputy First Minister doesn't allow this onto the agenda, we have to look at a resolution outside of Foras na Gaeilge. We're talking here about a problem with a cross-border body, a body that was set up under the Good Friday Agreement. That is a crisis that really should be causing many people to scratch their heads, not just in the Irish language community. That there is a serious issue here, that a cross-border body is not working as it should. And the whole ecosystem is suffering as a result. As I say, one of the Good Friday Agreement's key bodies is in crisis here. We have an institutional problem here, and we have a North and South, and the government in the South are looking at this. The Taoiseach is looking at this, but we don't see that the executive is looking at this. Whenever you can't even put the paper on the executive agenda. Thank you. And we don't have very much time left, but finally I would like to bring in Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Kirsla, Paddy and Cara for coming here today. I was furious when I saw you in the hall earlier after the last presentation, and today I'm not going to be leaving here happy. I'm going to be furious driving down the road, because we're hearing again from another organisation that is backed by legal requirement for a strategy to be delivered, and it's being held back. So I'm very frustrated. Now, there was a couple of things, Paddy. There was one thing that you said about delivery was outside of the department's control. Have you got to the crux of why the department believe that delivery is outside of their control whenever they have been chosen by the executive, the Department for Communities, to deliver on this?
I just want to make sure I can jiggle them.
Just want to make sure I can find.
To deliver a strategy and then the recommendations provided for.
Yeah, Sheelan Garager and Tyra.
I think the Minister answered a question from Colin recently, and he said the cross-departmental working group, he said that he cannot lay down a time scale because the other groups from the other departments are working on that group, and so he cannot lay down when that work should finish. He can when it suits him. He can say that you have to do your work by May or June if we are to have a draft strategy by Christmas. But it's not good enough to say 5 years down the line. And I don't think any government has taken 5 years to come up with a 20-year strategy. So really, from 2006, we should actually at this point be starting on our second 20-year strategy. We hadn't even a draft strategy for the first 20-year strategy. In the answer, the Minister also said that at the end of that,
that the next stage will be for me to bring a paper to the executive to ask them to consider and, if content, agree on next steps. Now,
he doesn't say that
includes a draft strategy.
There is no other example in these strategies that we have from this Minister that the government is going to the executive before he takes a draft strategy to the executive. So there is a big question mark here. What is actually going on? Why does the Minister have to go to the executive to get agreement to go to make up a draft strategy? Is that for another 6 months? We don't have any explanation here. You get the executive or expert panel, you bring together a co-design group, and you bring together a cross-departmental working group. We've been doing that work from 2021. After that, then you put all that work together and you come out on the other side with a draft strategy. There's no place in the middle that you have to go back to the executive if you don't have a draft strategy. So maybe, Mr. Chairman, you could answer that question. What is the Minister doing? So why does he have to go back to the executive? I think it's buying time par excellence. He's not happy to answer our questions, so we can't ask him what he's doing and why he's doing what he's doing. We know because of the last court case, we know that the blockage rests with the Deputy First Minister. Whenever and when a minister says that something is going to go to the executive, how do we know what's going to happen at the executive level? Is the Deputy First Minister going to block that? Well, can Brian give us any indication? Why is there so much buying time and time wasting really on the executive with regard to the draft strategy?
I'm going. The question will stay there. This is not a back and forward in that sense, and it's limited in that sense. But there are massive concerns. I have to say, Kelly, very briefly.
Just very briefly. Recently, we've heard the judicial outcome of the judicial review that was taken against the Minister for Communities and Executive with regards to the anti-poverty strategy, and as part of the judicial review outcome, it states that if now, the Minister and the Executive weren't found to be at fault, but they were found to have not progressed an anti-poverty strategy. But it does state in the judgment that if anyone is found to be deliberately blocking, I'm paraphrasing now, I'm not quoting, that would be illegal. Is that part of the format of your challenge, potentially going forward?
We were delighted to be in the High Court with the CAJ last week. We were there to listen and for the hearing, and we were there for the ruling, and we listened carefully to all of that. At present, our research is continuing. We have put in an FOI request about what is actually going on, what is not going on, and we will it'll be up to us then to take a decision. Do we take the executive or the minister or the deputy first minister to the courts? It is important to say that although the executive failed in their last visit to the court, the threshold is very, very high. So it is very. We are very clear about this. The executive has a statutory duty. They are trying to. That is then put on the minister's shoulders. It is up to the minister to bring up secretary. The executive can't do that. So at the present time, really, all the delay is stops with the minister. And that is stops with Gordon Lyons.
I don't believe that a reasonable time is 5 years, and much like that judgment, what is the hold up? Sorry, thank you.
Okay, just to say briefly, a lot of us attended the session that the Speaker did across the way, and I thought that was a wonderful demonstration of the importance of languages generally, of Gaelic and of Gaelic, and of the very significant influence it has had across these islands, back and forth in terms of our development, socially, culturally, linguistically, and the importance of Irish in that context. And I think that's absolutely the way in which we need to be going forward. I'll come back to you 1 second, Paddy.
Yes.
We will be picking up on some of the issues following the session, but go ahead, Paddy.
Yeah, just to gear out.
Just like to say, Colin, that I would like to thank the Speaker and the office of the Speaker, and of course Principal Deputy Speaker Carol. The Minister did actually call into that session at the end. We were very happy to see him, that he recognised it, and we were able to grab him and just show him and let him know how frustrated we were. And now it's a couple of days after, a few days after the event, said that he's still not happy to meet. And listen, I would like to thank you all for your attendance today, and we will see you again shortly. Thank you. Bye.
Add some cookies.
And enjoy yourselves.
Okay, members, so significant concerns and a significant pattern, I have to say, of a range of concerns where there's a lack of progress and a lack of engagement around a number of issues. Kelly?
Can we perhaps write to the executive to ask them if there's been a delay, irrespective of who's blocking it from the agenda, if this was economy, if this was money that was available to develop tourism or to develop manufacturing or to develop anything like that, then we would be shouting from the rooftops to try and do anything to make sure that money was available. So I'm just wondering why the executive 6 times I thought there was a rule about after 3 it would appear on the agenda. What's the issue with that? Is there an issue with the North-South Ministerial Council, or why is the funding mechanism for Forest na Gaeilge not being put onto the executive agenda? They may say it's none of your business because the executive is confidential, but I just would like that on the record, please.
Yep, members content. Can I also ask, there's a number of other recommendations or asks that the Conry are making there. Can I ask if members are content to support those and write to the Minister in relation to those, and where it affects TEO, as some of the issues do, that we write to TEO as well? Similarly to that, are members content with that?
Yes, please.
Okay, members, Cormac Shin Kyon Shin Agus Bemej Golerai. So we're moving on then to, just let me, I think we're coming here to item 13, Clerk, just going to check, which is the Forward Work Programme. Yep. So members, Forward Work Programme there is at agenda item 13 and at page 177 of your packs. Do members have any comments, or are they content to note the Forward Work Programme?
Can I just ask, obviously we didn't get our briefing today from the Heritage, Cultural and Creative Policies. We're aware that the commissioners for the languages and so on is going forward. it would be very useful if we could get these guys back as soon as possible, because the other meetings that are coming up in advance of Easter, you know, there's quite big pieces coming forward then. It would be...
Yeah.
Is it going to be difficult to do that?
No, well, the rescheduled briefing is coming up, but it doesn't include languages specifically.
2
but
weeks.
we're looking at 2 weeks to reschedule that briefing.
Okay.
In terms of languages, do we need to consider scheduling?
There are 2 other briefings that day, so it would still fit. There's one from the Civic Initiative and Housing, and there's the anti-poverty.
It's just if they're not able to make it to this committee very often, we need to make most use of the time when they're here. Maybe we can add that to them.
Yeah, members content? We do that, yeah. Okay, members otherwise content with Forward Work Programme? Agenda item 14, any other business? And will Ian Grow Ella, any other business members today? Hail, Gormagat. And final item then is, but before I just go to date, time and location, I want to very much extend our appreciation to the clerk and the team for the work in general, but I have to say today's meeting has been extremely challenging in relation to that last minute cancellation of that session, and then all of the work that was required. And I also want to extend our thanks to the groups who changed their timings to facilitate that, but the clerk and our team.
Hansard as well.
Yeah, and also Hansard and the translation team there in terms of their assistance with the session today. I want to thank them as well. Okay, members, so date, time and location of next meeting will be 10 a.m. on Thursday, 20th of March in room 29, and I wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day and a nice break. With one Monday we'll not have to...
welcome break.
Yeah. So, thank you, members. Gormela Mayagov, agus Slán go fáil.
Thank you.
Committee Room 29, Sound.